What an absolute joy it has been for us to be at this church. When the pastor, I have the privilege of preaching a Bible conference here every year, 4 years in a row, and they're so gracious, they've said I can keep doing it till I get it right. But when pastor first mentioned the church might be interested in hosting this annual meeting, that was a thrilling thought to me, and I knew it would be a great place to be, but I could not have anticipated everything this church has put into this meeting and done, and it's just been the most absolutely incredible time that I'm very, very grateful for. There has been, meeting was scheduled over a year ago, there has been a great deal of focus on this time, simply because of a couple of events that have taken place recently. In January, and I was there, I spend most of January in the Philippines every year, a very prominent independent Baptist Filipino preacher made the statement in a public meeting that it was time for us to leave the King James Bible behind. Boy, that got a lot of attention. And then just a couple weeks ago, as many of you know, there was an ad posted. I do not know the truth about this ad. Some folks have said that it was faked and it wasn't real. I have no idea. But there was an ad posted on Facebook for a conference in which several independent Baptist preachers were going to talk about how to transition your church from the King James Bible. Well, those two things have created a lot of attention. And this discussion has been followed around the world. And I've had a lot of folks ask me, are these two things connected? And I absolutely don't know if they're connected or not. I do not know the truth of all the details about the ad. None of that has to do with my point tonight. I've been watching for the last 20 years pastors take this step. And so when I knew there was such a focus on this, I changed my topic for this meeting, and I wanted to address 10 ways that men are transitioning their churches, 10 things they're doing to take their churches from being a King James church to a modernist. They always use the phrase modern Bibles church. I'm using the phrase modernist Bibles church for a reason. And to address that, it's not based on any specific individual that's under discussion right now or any specific presentation. I very purposely did not listen to the presentation, the podcast that folks have been focusing on that talks about how to do this. I didn't want it to be about that brother or about that particular thing, but I did want it to be about this. And I've got to tell you, as I've watched this for the last 20 years, there's some things about this that are absolutely amazing to me. One of the things that's absolutely amazing is every time it happens, I hear the same story. I mean, it's just amazing. Guys will say, you know, they took a church with every intention of honoring and keeping the church's King James position. But then they found out their children could not understand the King James Bible, and so they felt obligated to change for the sake of their children. A couple of things have bothered me about that. Number one, all these folks were saved in King James churches, raised and trained in King James churches, and they understood it. Why can't their children understand it? So that's what bothered me. Second thing that has bothered me, I'm a bus kid. I've made the statement many times in public, sometimes to appreciation and sometimes to rebuke. I've said seminary professors have trouble understanding the King James Bible, bus kids don't. I was 10 years old. There was not a Bible in our home. I attended church for the first time. Mom had been out of church for years. My father literally had never attended a single church service in his life. I got to church, got saved, started going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, midweek service, everything they had. They gave me a King James Bible. I started having daily devotions when I was 10. There were a lot of things I did not understand. Times I asked questions, but it didn't bother me. There were things I didn't understand. That's what I went to church for. That's what I was expecting. the thought that there was a problem with the Bible never crossed my mind. And as time has gone on, I've heard this over and over again. Well, you know, people just can't understand the King James Bible today. But I've been preaching for 51 years. This has not been my experience. I was a bus kid growing up. I've worked with tons of bus kids. I've never had a single bus kid tell me there was a problem with them understanding the Bible, at least not before they went to Bible college. Most recently pastored in inner city Chicago. And we had an Indian family started coming to our church. They came for 6 weeks, and they asked if they could talk with me, and they said, Pastor, we really like you and we appreciate you, but we just cannot stay in this church. I said, why is that? They said, you use the King James Bible. I said, we have a 10-year-old daughter, and we know she won't be able to understand it. We were sitting in their living room. And their daughter immediately spoke up and said, but Dad, I've learned more about the Bible in the last 6 weeks than in the 3 years we spent at the last church that didn't use the King James Bible. Another case was a young couple. They had met in college in Louisiana. He was from California, she was from Michigan. They took a job in the same company in Chicago, and they came to Chicago, and young lady has saved, grown up in the Independent Baptist Church. Young man was not saved, and she was burdened about his being saved, but she had been taught by her pastor, you can't understand the King James Bible. She'd been having devotions out of the NIV for years. And looking for an Independent Baptist church on the north side of Chicago. There are only two. And so they came to our church that Sunday morning. She realized I was preaching out of the King James Bible. They were there for that service. After the service, she immediately apologized to him for taking him to a church that used the King James Bible because she knew he couldn't understand it. And his response was, well, I want to go back there. Why would I want to go to a church that only tells me things I already know? In a few weeks, he got saved, got baptized, became a wonderfully faithful church member. And so I've heard this story repeated so many times. But why in the world would this be? The bus kids, people that you're dealing with without Christian background, don't have trouble with this. But pastors' kids who grew up in Christian schools and homeschooled in church have trouble with it. And we're blessed to see a lot of people saved at church in Chicago, and we had this come up over and over again. Never one time did one of these people got saved, non-Christian background, ever tell me they were having trouble understanding the King James Bible. But always somebody from a church they were not saved at would tell them, you shouldn't go to that church because they use the King James Bible and you'll never be able to understand it. Until somebody told them that, it never came up. Finally, I figured out why seminary professors have trouble with the King James Bible, why preachers' kids have trouble with the King James Bible, and bus kids don't. We didn't have anybody to tell us that we couldn't understand it. I'd like you to look to 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 21 with me. I understand we live in a day in which folks are very sensitive to the idea of Christians criticizing one another. I appreciate that. So I will promise you this. The crowd that is so concerned that we might criticize folks that are criticizing us for using the King James Bible will never ask the other side to be so gracious to us. And trust me, I know how this works. Some years ago, I had a friend of mine who was not a King James guy like I am, but he was a pastor. And he had written a book about the King James movement and what he thought the problems with it were. And repeatedly, he quoted me. But he never used my name. We were and are personal friends, and he wasn't trying to point it at me, but I was the King James guy he knew. And so the book's full of quotes from me that without my name. And he asked me to preach a missions conference at his church. And I went. People said, why did you go? Because I wanted his church to give more to missions. Anything I could do to help that, I'd be glad. So we got there, and he had a table of things he'd written out, and he told one of the people that worked for him, get the book about the King James Bible off the table. He said, Brother Stringer knows I was quoting him. I don't want to offend him, and I'll get that off. And the person whose job it was to remove it from the table forgot. And so I got there, and all of a sudden the church realized that book's out on the table. And it just came a quiet over the place, wanting to know what I was going to do or say, if I was going to be offended or what was going to happen. And I kind of got tickled by it, just watching it. Everybody was on edge and everybody was nervous. And so finally I got up and said, before I get started, I should address this because I know you're concerned about how I'm going to feel about the book. I said, let me tell you what offended me about it. He didn't use my name. It would have been marvelous publicity if he'd called me my name all through that book. This is how this works. Just recently, somebody wrote an entire book focused to refute my teaching on the King James Bible. And they sent me an electronic copy. And I responded to it, and boy, I thought that was kind of interesting. I've always talked about the privilege it was mine to work with what I think are the two best teachers on the King James Bible issue in the country, David Brown and David Sorensen, and I just have the opportunity to work with them and be kind of on the second string. But, man, nobody ever wrote a book about Brown. Nobody ever wrote a book about Sorensen. I'm feeling really important now, Dr. Brown. But he sent me an email copy. I sent back. I said three things. I said, number one, I read the first chapter. I said, I want to thank you for picking me as a representative of the King James movement. I said, I'm honored and thrilled. I said, secondly, I don't like to read on the computer. I'm an old-fashioned book person. I said, read the first chapter. I'm not going to read the rest of it, but I promise you when it comes out, I will buy a copy and I will read it. And thirdly, I said, you're a brother in Christ in spite of the depth of our disagreement. I wish you well. I wish your family well. In those areas of your ministry that are biblical, if there was ever anything I could do to help you, I would. This is not personal. By the way, you get used to being criticized. Because of speaking at these conferences and some other King James places I've spoken and messages being on the internet, and also because I've spoken out against Calvinism and that's gotten a lot of attention, I literally get criticized every single day on the internet. It's got to be routine. I really am used to it. It doesn't bother me anymore. Frankly, I'm a little flattered by it. However gracious we may wish to be and hope that we could be, there are some issues that we have to take a stand on and some issues we have to address, even if it puts us at odds with brethren we wish we could get along with. And on top of that, it's fascinating to me that the folks who talk to us about being nice, it appears the thought of being nice to us has never crossed their mind. Frankly, they remind me of political Democrats. Forgive me if I just crossed your line. They speak about tolerance all the time. But the one thing they never do is tolerate us. I have to move quickly on many of these. I want about 10 ways people are involved in transitioning churches from King James Bible to modernist versions, and 10 things we should do about it. 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 21, I am very much aware that the original context of this is about finances, but the general principle upholds in the Bible issue as well. When it says providing for honest things, not only in the sight of the Lord, but also in the sight of men. 10 ways to take a church from being a King James church to the modernist versions. Number one, lie to the pulpit committee when you're candidating for the church. Because you know that they would never call you if they knew what your plans were. Yeah, I know. The same story gets told over time. Well, that was what I intended. I intended to honor their position. But then I found out my children could never understand the King James Bible, and I just had to do something. Do you know how much I believe that? I know of more than one case where men came in and very quickly began to look for the people in the church who would be their allies and their support in making such a change, and talk to them about where they wanted to be in a few years. Same thing happens with Calvinism, by the way. It's another topic for another time. Guys will lie about that in order to get a church. And they have an agenda, and they have a plan. And the second thing they do, you manipulate, you maneuver, you finesse, you never tell the people what you're up to. You see them as sheep that have to be manipulated and taken places. I compared it recently. Folks ask, why do these people keep telling us they're King James when they're not? When my mom got Alzheimer's and had to be in the Alzheimer's wing of the nursing home, one of the things they told me is you cannot tell her the truth about everything that's happening. She will not be able to cope. Says you have to manage her. Years later, when my father-in-law got Alzheimer's and did not know what was going on around him, she was given the same counsel. But with all noble motives, she said, I'm not going to lie to my dad. I'm going to tell him exactly what's happening. Can I tell you that was brutal? And sometimes of folks who don't have the ability to comprehend and understand, you just say what you have to say to get by, and that is how that crowd looks at us. They think we're the old-fashioned, uneducated, foolish people that they just can't afford to tell us what they really believe and what they're really up to, so they have to manage us. Third thing, they constantly use cliches from modernists to belittle the King James Bible. They don't tell you where the cliches came from. They don't tell you where the ideas came from. But they constantly use cliches that are common among the modernists, like you can't read this, you can't understand it, lost people can't grow or can't understand, new converts can't grow. At our church, we have 26-lesson new convert program. My wife works in that. It's all done one-on-one. And recently she got assigned a Polish lady who'd come to the United States who barely could use English, but she got saved through our radio program. And she's coming 26 lessons covering for the course of life, all from the King James Bible. And we just watched that lady grow so much. Come to where she understood leaving the Catholic Church and baptism. Didn't understand it immediately, but she came to understand that. She came and got baptized. She was able to reach all of her children for Christ. She's brought folks and neighbors that she witnessed to and brought them to Christ. She's come to understand and just thoroughly be thrilled with identifying as a Baptist and what we believe and what we stand for. And the issue of the fact that she was looking at the King James Bible never came up one time. I've suggested sometimes, instead of saying we're going to find these new converts a better Bible, maybe we should find them a better pastor. One who will talk to them, who will work with them, who will train them, who will teach them. I used to always give new converts my phone number, and we gave them a Bible, and I said, we want to encourage you to read the Bible every day. We don't expect you to understand it all. I said, don't even worry about that. Just read it till you find something you do understand, and it blesses your heart. I said, if you have a question that bothers you, call me. I'm the pastor. That's what I'm here for. I've answered a lot of Bible questions during the course of that time, but I didn't mind that. I was the pastor. That was my job. These folks use cliches about the King James Bible and how it's this and it's that and the other thing, and they did not get those cliches from Bible believers. Then they start talking about other translations in a positive tone and never, ever discuss who translated them or the principles they were translated by or the text they were translated from. They never mention, well, this new Bible, I said, it matches 1%, actually less, of the old Greek manuscripts in the New Testament, when your King James Bible matches 99%. Boy, that'd get people's attention, I think, if you said that. And I have found, I cannot believe these folks know as little as it seems. But I was talking with one man, independent Baptist preacher. His name you would know him. He's known all over the country. And we're talking about the ESV, which he just recently adopted. And we're talking about that. And he said, I think it's received text. I said, brother, it's obviously not received text. He said, well, how do I know that's not Ruckmanite propaganda? I said, read the introduction where they tell you what manuscripts they use. And I said, if you really want an education, read the introduction to the Gideon's ESV Bible. Because the Gideons wanted to use English Standard Version, but they were uncomfortable with all the missing verses. So the ESV people gave them the right, where the verses have been taken out, to put the King James versions in there. They talk about it in the introduction. They said some of the brethren respect the received text, and we understand their convictions, and it's not ours, but we appreciate that, and so we've given the Gideons permission to put all those verses back in there. But nobody else has permission to do it. Gideon's paid for a lot of Bibles. I said, this isn't hard to find out. Or, I'll have folks tell me, so we're received text. We use the New King James. And it's just as much received text as the King James. I say, really? The New King James Version, The Great Tradition, by Arthur L. Farstad, general editor, in which he says, page 111, on every page of the New King James Version New Testament, the serious reader will find 3 different textual views represented. So, well, he's talking about the footnotes. To a large degree, he is. But in every page of your New King James, you'll find the critical text acknowledged in a positive way. And that is what we want to put in front of people and then call it received text. I've had 2 different preachers tell me Mr. Farstad did not know what he was talking about. I say, you understand the New King James better than the general editor did? You cannot pick up the New King James, which you're preaching out of now, and look at the bottom of the page and find the footnotes? I have a hard time believing they really don't know all this. I think they're trying to manage we deficient people. And then you start using other versions a little bit. You know, just go to this verse because this verse says, this is a verse I like in this. When did you become the authority? You introduce them slowly. And then every time you're questioned, play the martyr card. Oh, I'm being picked on. I'm being persecuted. Do you understand if you enter the arena of public debate, other people have the right to answer you? These folks are demanding a debate in which everybody else stays quiet. When you challenge the historic position of a church, the people that have been loyal, faithful, and part of that church have the right to know what's going on. They have the right to ask what's happening. They have the right to ask why. And they have the right to ask why you took the pastor to that church. If you don't stand for that church. Church I pastored in Chicago, they wanted to talk to me. I really wasn't interested. At that time, they were identified with a particular fellowship. And I didn't think I would fit. I just gave them a Wednesday night. I went to preach on Wednesday night. I went to sit down with the pulpit committee. I said, why would you all be interested in me? I am not like your fellowship at all. They said, our fellowship will not send us a pastor that uses the King James Bible and uses godly music, and that's what we want. I said, okay, now you have my attention. Because if they'd wanted to change, they'd wanted a different Bible, or I was wanting to put a King James Bible in when they weren't using it, I would have to have told them ahead of time exactly what I was doing. And then they could have decided how to respond to it or not. These guys play the martyr card. How people are criticizing me, people are picking on me, and boy, they do so well. They talk about how we're uneducated, we're unkind, we're not nice, we're all Ruckmanites, we're all Ripplingerites, we don't know what we're doing, we're not up to date. One guy said about me, I don't think he's ever read a book on this issue. And worst of all, they call us name callers. I did ask a man one time. The fellow that I mentioned earlier wrote the book, and he's quoting me without using my name at all. I said, how many books from our side have you ever read? You ever read Brown? You ever read Sorensen? You ever read David Daniels? You ever read D.A. Waite? And his answer was, I don't need to read any books on that side because I already understand it. The depth of scholarship with which we have to deal. People in the church, they're just not responding well to the pastor. They're troublemakers. They're difficult. Man, when you're asking a church to go against its doctrine or its heritage, you sure have an obligation to make every point of why clear to them. And you got a responsibility to make a convincing case. And then, of course, they emphasize new. This is new. This is new. That was old. People can't understand what was old. You understand the first book written advocating the replacement of the King James Bible because it was archaic was written in the 1700s. It's not in print, of course, anymore. People have been saying that about the King James Bible for literally hundreds of years. I don't know if Brother Jason and Brother Doug remember, and they made arrangements for me to be out at the 400th anniversary King James Bible celebration in Washington, D.C. And there were some other people there speaking on the King James, saying nice things about it, but they began to get a little nervous when they found out that David Sorensen was there and I was there, and we got to the end, the last three guys before I spoke all felt obligated to say, well, the King James Bible was wonderful, historical, but that, they were not, they needed to identify they were not one of those people, that think it's the Word of God in English. So my initial remark was, for the sake of the record, full disclosure, I am one of those people. And then I asked them, why are we having a 400th anniversary celebration? When do you have the 400th anniversary celebration of a book? And translations are considered old at 50 and archaic at 100. So why are we having the 400th anniversary? Oh, but it's new. We want them to have something that's new. When did new become a qualification for ancient words? Oh, but we want it to read like the daily newspaper. Do you really? Seriously? Some years back, where we had concerns, my wife went and got medical tests. Our doctor was a member of the church I pastored. And we got a call on a Wednesday afternoon. The doctor wanted to talk to us after church service. And he's one of those folks, some people you can preach to them and you never know what they're thinking. Other people, literally everything they're thinking. He was one of those, everything he's thinking. Came to the Wednesday night service and he wouldn't look at me. He'd look at the ceiling. He'd look at the floor. And I realized 2 minutes into my message we were going to get bad news. It was over. He met with us. Said my wife had cancer. He was making arrangements for surgery before the week was out. We went home. And I was trying to be the brave husband, this doesn't, we're okay and this is all right. And I wasn't feeling that way at all. But I was talking that way. And finally she went to bed and I'm alone. And I feel overwhelmed. And there on my coffee table was a Chicago Tribune, which reads just like the daily newspaper, and a King James Bible. Which one do you think I went to in that moment? Oh, new. All that counts is that it's new. Huh? Really? And then you outlast the people who want to act consistent with the church's heritage and doctrinal statement. Someone will die. Someone will move away in the normal course of things. As long as you catch them one at a time, you can push them out. Because usually when folks realize this is happening, they realize one family at a time. And you can push one family out. And a little bit later, when another family finally figures it out, you can push them out. And you just outlast the people who act honorably. And then, of course, you exalt your own scholarship. Talk about how you've studied these things. And man, you understand these things. And you know these things. And you know the answers to this. And you've done a vast study of this. Huh? And then finally, the 10th step. Are you ready? You've now been pushing several translations. And so some of your people have this one, and some of your people have this one, and some of your people have this one, some of your people have this one, some of your people have this one. One fellow said recently, I'm recommending 5 translations. So, which one's the authority in your church? I heard somebody say it. Which one's the authority? And the answer is none of them are. So when there's no Bible that's the authority, guess who gets to be the authority? The preacher does. And I would suggest to you, most of these guys at least knew that from day one, from the beginning. They knew what their goal was when they didn't tell the pulpit committee what their real position was. They knew where they wanted to end up, and they believed they were smart enough to finesse and maneuver and manipulate the people until they could get to that point. God save us from clever preachers. Open and honest in the sight of all men. When a man candidates for a church, he needs to tell that church exactly what he is all about. What he believes and what his goals and intentions are as far as he understands them. And if honestly he takes a church and then he comes to a point where he wants to change something like the Bible, he owns the church, an open and honest, as soon as he decided that, explanation of everything that's going on and allowing that church to respond how they want to when they find out the pastor believes something they would never have called him in the first place. You know. At the end of the day, it's about what the authority is. Every pastor should be bound by biblical authority. There should be something that his people can judge him by, hold him accountable by, a standard that is greater than he is. And all over, we've got guys, I know people have asked, well, is this coordinated? There's so many similarities, I really wonder sometimes. Is this coordinated with the folks in the Philippines? My Filipino friends are asking me if this is coordinated. I don't know the answer. Maybe it all just comes ultimately from the same source. These guys are so much alike. I really wonder say, what in the world are we going to do? Okay, let's talk about that for a little bit. Now, step number one, let's face the reality of modern communication. Because this is the attitude of a lot of our guys. Well, I don't have to worry about that issue because I only preach from the King James Bible. My people have never heard anything else from this pulpit. And once upon a time, that argument may have carried the day. But not now. Everybody has access to information on the internet attacking your King James Bible. Everybody's got access to information on the internet promoting Calvinism. You pick a bad idea, and all of your people have access to that idea. I got to say, I've never had a Calvinist in the pulpit. That can't happen here. Boy, that day's over. And so here's what's going to have to happen. We're going to have to face the reality of this, that this is a challenge that is real for all of our churches and all of our ministries right now. And so we all have to become teaching pastors. We have to address these things on a regular basis. It's going to take more work and more study to be ready in the pulpit, more planning and more attention, but we're going to have to come to grips with this. This has to be taught on regularly. And I know I've heard this both ways. Some pastors say, well, I don't want to have to deal with that and make any of our folks upset. I'll bring in, people to deal with that. I've been the guy brought in sometimes. And other folks will say, I do all the teaching on that. I don't want any guests to approach this subject. Can I humbly suggest to you, your people need to hear this from their pastor? And they also need to hear it from a multiplicity of voices. And you got to understand the depth of what we're up against and what we face. I know you men treasure your churches, what they stand for, and the legacy of your churches. But you understand this. If you don't handle this and deal with this, in the next generation, your church will be anti-King James. And your church will be Calvinist. I guarantee. We're watching it happen in places we never thought it could happen. I was preaching in the Bahamas for my friend David Adams several years ago. They're having a big conference. All the folks from all the islands and lots of American colleges and various groups came. And Brother Adams told me that the colleges and universities that were coming there to recruit students were anti-King James. And I knew some of them. I knew that was true. And he said, they'd like to take the King James Bible away from us. He said, I want you to take a night and stop them. I honestly never go in anybody else's pulpit looking for a problem. I never consciously preach against the beliefs or teachings of a pastor anywhere I go. But every now and then they invite you. And so he told me, he said, I want you to defeat those people tonight. Okay. I'm a real big believer in pastoral leadership. And so I hit it really heavy. In the Bahamas, they have no conception of time, so I hit it really long. I'm not joking when I say that. When I was done, there were some American institutions represented there that were not happy. But Dr. Adams got up and said, you tried to take our Bible away from us. He gave it back to us tonight. You lose. Since then, he's had Brother Brown and I in for conference. I'm just telling you, you're going to have to be teaching pastors. And when I say this, here is what we're sometimes tempted to do. We're tempted to say the things that our crowd of preachers already knows and believes. They're hearing from the enemies of our position. And we've got to give them enough to refute the things they're hearing. See, there's a few pro-King James lines we can throw out in any of our preachers' meetings. Everybody says hallelujah, and that's great. And that's all fine, and that's good. But we're preaching to ourselves. We've got to be able to give them enough. Same thing's true about Calvinism. We've got to be able to give them enough that they can handle, which means we've got to know what the other side is saying, and we've got to address the issues they raise. And I don't mean once and come back to it in a decade. If we do not do that, we'll lose every single one of our churches to this. By the way, let me just say a word about this organization. We started this organization with the idea we wanted to be helping this. Brother Brown and I will be going in a couple months to an island in the Caribbean that only has one church that uses the King James Bible, and they're under attack all the time. Small church, but we're going there to spend some days with their people and reinforcing their people and to stand with them while they're under attack. When we started this organization, we sat down and began to talk about things we accomplish, and one of the things we wanted to do was have a speakers bureau where you could get 2 guys or 4 guys or 6 guys or whatever you want to get and create your own conference that fits you. We did not want to build it around a person. There's nobody in our group you have to invite in order to have a King James Bible Research Council conference. If Phil Stringer's not your cup of tea, we got people that are better at this than I am. Dr. Brown's leadership has been marvelous, but this is not about Dr. Brown either. What has happened in many of our groups when there's a movement that starts out to be pro-King James, it becomes about this guy or this guy or this guy, and they all want to be the man. There's one woman that wants to be the man, but they all want to be the man, and they make it all about themselves. That's done us a lot of damage. We cannot make this about personalities. Last May, I got ill. But interestingly enough, Brother Sorensen was ill at the same time. Brother Brown, Brother Sorensen, and I had all been at the same place. Brother Sorensen and I came out of it ill and in the hospital and life-threatening, and Brother Brown seemed fine. I don't know how that happened. I could not talk, and I could not open my eyes. And they assumed I was unconscious, but I heard everything going on around me. And they were having a discussion in my hospital room about whether I would live or not. And they were telling my wife they did not know if they could save me. And I kept trying to talk so bad, felt like I should be in on this conversation. But I couldn't. As hard as I laid there, hooked up to machines, and I found myself falling asleep, and I honestly didn't know if I was dying or just falling asleep. And all kinds of things began to go through my mind. And about my family and ministry. And one of the things I crossed my mind, I said, man, if I'm gone, and if the day comes when Brother Brown and Brother Sorensen, neither of whom are as young as springtime, are gone, this organization goes on. Because we planned it from day one to bring in guys younger than ourselves, to get them started on this and let them grow up in this. And man, I'm really proud of them. But that was the whole concept. When we're gone, us as individuals are gone. This goes on. Because it's not about a personality. But if we, or 1 or 2 of us, or 5 of us can help you, you feel free to let us know. Brother Brown will be retiring from his pastorate, not from his ministry, but from his pastorate at the end of January. And be available all the time. And Brother Sorensen is out all the time, and I'm out all the time, and we got a bunch of other wonderful people. Avoid playing, next point, what I call the I'm more King James than you are game. Which a lot of people get into. They want to pick some detail of this discussion that is not the main point, our confidence in the King James Bible. They want to pick some detail and act like that detail is the fundamental of the faith. And they want to isolate themselves from everybody that hasn't got that detail. Play that game and you'll lose credibility with your people. Or, in order to make the I'm more King James than you are point, they grab on to some really stupid thing that they have not thought through and studied. And they try to make that the big deal. And your people will see through it. Your bus kids will see through it. And this is the greatest weakness of the Independent Baptist movement. Once a Baptist preacher said something in public, if it turns out to be wrong, that almost always will refuse to ever make it right. My wife calls that the Baptist disease. Do not play the I'm more King James than you are game. I am thankful for everybody that honors and uses and exalts the King James Bible. If there's a detail they've got differently than me, I'm still glad that they do that. If you act foolish with this, you'll lose your credibility to the people, and the guy that wants to come along and take this away from your legacy, boy, it'll be just waiting for him. Did you know the average Independent Baptist church, when it comes open, gets 100 resumes? And in that 100 resumes, there's going to be some people you wouldn't want to see pastor that church. Prepare your people. I thought several times about softening these words that I'm about to say. I did not want to say this way. I went over it 3 times, saying, how else can I do this? But I believe this is so real and so important that I cannot fail to say it as strongly as it needs to be said. Prepare your people for scam artists in the Independent Baptist ministry who will just simply say whatever they need to say at any moment to get what they want. Our movement has a fair number of them. They'll tell your pulpit committee anything it wants to hear in order to get that pastorate. Doesn't matter. I would be aware for scam artists in the Bible college business. People ask me all the time, why are there so many Bible colleges that tell you they're King James, but then when your students get there, they get taught something else? I can explain that. They need tuition payments for operating expenses and mortgage expenses. And the kids excited about going off to be preachers and missionaries and Christian school teachers are coming out of King James churches. And if they told the truth about what they're going to teach them, their student body would plummet. And they wouldn't have the money to pay operating expenses and mortgage expenses. So they'll tell you what you want to hear. Do not base your evaluation of a Bible college on their promotional literature. Talk to people who have had kids there. See what really happens. I was talking with a couple the other day, and they were interested in a particular Bible college, and they said, we just spent a half an hour with the dean of the Bible department asking what they believe about the King James Bible before we make a final decision to send our daughter there. And he said, after 30 minutes, we do not know what they believe. I said, yes, you do. There is a reason why that happens. These people are smart enough to make a clear statement when they want to. So controversy arose about this school or that school, whatever. Well, let them settle it. Let them make a clear statement that they can back up, that they can live with. I understand this. When I first got acquainted with Day Spring Bible College and was a visiting professor, we didn't have folks in the college, but we had folks that came to the church that were not King James. They were very good in certain subjects, and they would ask them to come and respect the King James Bible, etc. And they wanted to fellowship with them, and they wanted to take advantage of their expertise. And they would always tell them. I know what they tell them. I'd see the letters. they either forgot or didn't care, because they kept getting up in our pulpits and correcting the King James Bible. And so finally, there was a ministry decision made. We cannot have people like that anymore. Heck, one very well-known Bible teacher who spoke at our big conference every summer, he would kick it off every summer, so much connected with that, people at the church still call that spot in the conference by his name. And they asked me, would I be willing to take that spot? Because they knew I would not embarrass them on the King James Bible. I mean, we like to get along with everybody that we're brothers and sisters with in Christ, but the day has come, the lines have been so drawn, that is just not always possible. And so when you got to correct something, correct it. Okay? You be careful what Bible colleges you send young people to. Teach folks the value of heritage and legacy. I mean, guys come into churches without a second thought. They destroy the heritage of that church, the legacy of that church. You got a crowd out there that has no respect for the preachers that won them to Christ and trained them in the Lord. They have no respect for the people that built churches before them. And they'd like to have a building, nice building, paid for by people who honored the King James, and now they want to come into it and dishonor the King James in that building that was paid for by the people that honored it. I'm not speaking against saying that there's never a reason for change. I'm not saying that. But it depends on what you're changing. Okay? When I took a 120-year-old church in Chicago, there were some things I wanted to change. And I'll never forget my assistant pastor saying, as we ran into some difficulty with it, he said, "Pastor, people don't mind change, just as long as everything stays the same." And I hear this crowd that wants to transition from the King James, they're talking about change all the time. And I listen to them talk about change, and they're always using examples that are non-biblical. And you know, that's fine. I get it. Second church I pastored had 4 chairs on a pulpit. There was me and a song leader. It was traditional that the song leader sit in that chair and the pastor sit in that chair. I mean, they call it, that's pastor's chair, song leader's chair, just 2 other chairs. Now, they were used to having baptism beginning of service. And I said, "Cindy, I just want to see what happens." We had baptism. I went and changed clothes, and I came up, and I sat in this chair. I thought the place would fall apart. And I said, "I'm never going to do that again. It's not worth the trouble." Sure, there are changes to be made. I get it. I've been asked before in a question and answer session. Bear with me, I've gone a while, but I'm going to blame Brother Brown. He stole all my minutes. It's not true, but I'm just going to blame him anyway. They said, what's the most distinguished mark of a church that's dying? I said, poor lighting. I'm serious. There used to be a concept that churches, the lighting should be dim because it made people more reverent and worshipful. And a lot of churches were built with terrible lighting. And people today just will not go to places where the lighting is bad. And I've known churches that just recoiled over improving the lighting. I'm not talking about that. That kind of change, there's a place for. And sometimes very necessary. But Proverbs chapter 24 and verse 21 says, "Meddle not with them that are given to change." Now, it didn't say don't meddle with folks that want to change something. It says folks that are given to change. They have to change. Change is their ministry. Change is their method. Change is their purpose. They're addicted to change. They've just got to change. When there's something to be changed that's non-biblical, do whatever makes most sense. If a church finds out it has taken a wrong position because of clear study of the Bible, it should change it. But those folks who have to change because it's where they get their significance is in being change agents. It's where they get their power from having changed everything. It's where they get their fulfillment. We talk in world affairs, history, megalomaniacs who believe that they need to conquer other countries because they just believe their being in power is so important that it's worth the sacrifice of thousands or millions of lives. Vladimir Putin, current example. Okay? But megalomania is not limited to international conquerors. There's some preachers who just think them being the guy that everybody listens to is worth whatever it takes, and it becomes their purpose and their focus, and the Bible warns us about them and tells us to stay away from them. By the way, just in case it makes you happy, and the New King James is your authority, the New King James says, do not associate with those given to change. Or the American Standard Version makes you happy, says, and company not with those that are given to change. I'll do a last thing and be done. We need to fellowship with like-minded people. We need to be emboldened and reminded and encouraged on a regular basis. And it's wonderful. I'm thrilled with all the folks that are listening to videos of our meetings and so forth on the internet, and I'm grateful for that. I met a lot of people. Some of you are here because of that. That's wonderful. But I mean something beyond that. We need each other. We need to have meetings. Doesn't have to be with us. There's wonderful teachers on the King James Bible, not part of our organization. But we need to have moments that we rally around our Bible. We exalt it, we defend it, we glory in it, we rejoice in it. Those children that are being raised by pastors who are protecting them from the King James Bible, I feel sorry for those children that they don't get to be raised with what I got growing up on the King James Bible. Because I had a good pastor and a good Sunday school teacher. We need fellowship with like-minded people. We need moments like this. We are all temporary. Some of our ministries will be soon done. Some of you are reasonably young and you'll be at this for years. But if we do not protect the heritage that God has given us, the heritage we were saved under, the heritage that we grew up spiritually under, the heritage that we saw send people to the mission field, the heritage that no matter what anybody thinks, grew new converts. If we don't stand for it and protect it, it will be gone in a few years. And what we have built, what you have built, will be in the hands of somebody that has got a completely different agenda. Glory to God, protect the heritage that God has given to you. And glory to God, I'm thankful. We hear this all the time. Well, King James, a guy in Philadelphia, King James is gone. People are abandoning it right and left. It's all over. You should have seen the response he got to that. I think he got an education really quickly. That whatever he thought King James Bible users aren't done yet. We're not beaten. We're not defeated. What people do in other churches is their business. But what they advocate as a movement is our responsibility to answer to. And glory to God, chance to fellowship with a group of folks like you reminds me and encourages me. I know the statement was made in the Philippines, and it's been made here, almost the exact statement, that we're on the wrong side of history. Really? 400 years ago, the majority of English-speaking Bible believers began their day with devotions out of the King James Bible. And for 4 centuries, people have been trying to end that. And this morning, all around the English-speaking world. By the way, I preach in other countries that use the English King James Bible. They absolutely love it, and they never complain about it being hard to understand. I never hear it. Today, all around the world, millions of English-speaking Bible believers begin their day with devotions out of a Bible the other crowd's been trying to destroy for 400 years. God bless you.